Right, good morning, everybody. Welcome. I hope that you have had a good sleep so that you're wide awake because we're going deep. Let's put it that way. This is one of those Mishnahs that when you start to read it, it seems to be just straightforward and good advice and the kind of things that we could all relate to. And then as you progress, you suddenly realize, oh my, there's really some depth and power over here that we didn't necessarily see coming. So, like I say, fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's an interesting one. We're in chapter 2. We're starting Mishnah number 4. Mishnah number 4 continues from the previous Mishnah, which was attributed to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Was attributed to Rabban Gamliel. So, Hu Haya Omer. He used to say there's two parts to this Mishnah. So we'll read through the whole Mishnah from start to finish, and we'll do, so to speak, an overview to start, get the salient points, and then we'll come back to the first half of the Mishnah because it's got an incredibly profound series of lessons for us. Hu Haya Omer. He used to say, Asei Retzoinoi Ki Retzoincha. Make Hashem's will like your will. So essentially what he's telling us is that what the things that Hashem wants should become the things that you want. Okay, straightforward. And there's a quid pro quo. In order that, so listen how it works. You should make Hashem's will your will. In simple English, you should make yourself want the things that Hashem wants in order that Hashem will make your will His will. In other words, that Hashem will want the things that you want. Okay, it sounds very straightforward. And it's effectively saying, if you do what Hashem wants, then He'll do what you want. Or as a famous American president once said, ask not what your God can do for you. Right? That's basically what he's saying over here. Don't fixate on the things that first you do what Hashem wants, and then as a result of that, you'll get what you need. We actually see this, by the way, in the Torah, very interesting. In Parashas Pinchas, which is towards the end of Moshe's leadership and towards the end of his life, so he goes to Hashem, and it's the only place in the whole Torah that you have the syntax in this way. Vayedaber Moshe el Hashem, and Moshe spoke to Hashem. Usually it's Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe. So what does he say to Hashem? He says, Yifkoid Hashem elokei aruchos l'chol basar ish al ha'eda. Hashem, I'm nearing the end of my tenure. So would you please appoint somebody who'd be a suitable replacement? Somebody who would lead the Jews going forward. So what does Hashem say to him? You look in the very next thing that happens. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe leim etzaves b'nei Yisrael v'matalem es korbanei lachmi le'ishai. Hashem tells Moshe about what's called the daily public offerings. So there was the Tamid offering, which is brought every single day. There's the Musaf offering, which is brought on the various special days, Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and Yom Tov. And so basically the Midrash tells us what happened over there at that point in time. Hashem says to Moshe, before you tell me what my children need and ask me to look after their needs, why don't you tell my children what I need? It's the same kind of a principle. Before you tell us what you want, first do what Hashem wants. And so most of the commentaries, like for example the Baratanura, they point out exactly that's what's going on over here. That if we do what Hashem wants, Hashem will align nature to suit what we want. And he gives an example. He says, for example, when it comes to tzedakah, what does Hashem want from us when it comes to tzedakah? We know what we want. We want to fulfill the mitzvah. We want to give tzedakah. And we also don't want to get too crazy. It's difficult times right now. Finances are tight. I don't want to go too crazy with tzedakah. Maybe I'll hold back a little bit. So the Baratanura says, don't give tzedakah the way you want. Give tzedakah the way that Hashem wants. How does Hashem want us to give tzedakah? He wants us to go a little bit beyond what's comfortable. Kedei, in order that what will happen in return, that Hashem will fulfill what you want. So there are various things that you want. Perhaps you don't have the finances for them. So if you push yourself to give tzedakah, as an example, it's just one example. If you push yourself to do more than what is comfortable for you in order to do what Hashem wants, then Hashem will give you the things that you need. That's level 1. Level 2, Batel retzoincha mipnei retzoinoi. Now here's a difficult word. Batel. Batel means basically to negate. Bitul means that something is no longer of any value. It's as if it doesn't exist. So batel retzoincha mipnei retzoinoi. That means that you should neutralize your wishes in favor of Hashem's wishes. This is different. The first one was saying, do what Hashem wants as if it's what you want. This one is saying, neutralize what you want in favor of what Hashem wants. And then you'll also get a reward from Hashem, but it will be a different kind of a response, because Hashem always responds to us midah keneged midah. So when you do what Hashem wants, then Hashem will do what you want. But when you push aside what you want in favor of what Hashem wants, so then midah keneged midah, what do you get as a response? Kedei sheyivatel retzoin acherim mipnei retzonnecha. Then the result is going to be that Hashem will neutralize what other people want in favor of what you want. Okay, so the big thing that we're going to have to explore in this Mishnah is, what are these two different phases that seem to be different and possibly even contradictory? Because the first statement is, make your will like His will, or make His will like your will. And the other one says, get rid of your will. So which one is it? Am I supposed to have a will and it should be aligned with Hashem's will? Or should I have no will at all? We need to understand that. That's definitely something which is intriguing and profound. But I did say we'd first go through the whole Mishnah and we'd look at just various insights into the whole Mishnah, and then we'll come back to that particular point because it's an incredibly profound concept. Now, we're also about to see something that you don't normally see, and that is two sages, we haven't yet come across this, two sages who were not contemporaries being quoted in the same Mishnah. By the way, there are different opinions about exactly how the Mishnahs are split up, but we'll go with this particular girsa where they are part of the same Mishnah. So now we go back to Hillel. That's the other thing we're seeing here that we haven't yet seen before. Up until this point, everything was chronological. Now we're quoting somebody who's from an earlier generation. So Hillel teaches us a series of very valuable principles. Principle number 1, Al tifrosh min hatzibor. Do not separate from the community. In the 21st century, or more specifically in 2020, this one is where you're supposed to say, ouch. Al tifrosh min hatzibor. I shouldn't separate from the community. What are you talking about? I'm too scared to go to shul. It's the coronavirus. What do you mean, al tifrosh min hatzibor? How should I go to shul? Aha. There's some food for thought. I guess Hillel was aware, he had a little bit of insight into how things were going to be at a time later in history. So why al tifrosh? What does it mean, al tifrosh min hatzibur? Do not separate from the community. Incidentally, there's another place in the Gemara where it relates this to a pasuk that says, lo sisgoidedu. Now, lo sisgoidedu in its literal translation means that if a person is in anguish, particularly over, God forbid, the loss of a family member, they shouldn't cut themselves. Loitis goidedu. But the Gemara says that what it teaches us is, loitis goidedu means that you shouldn't have gedudim. You shouldn't split the community into little communities. You know, this one davening on their tennis court and that one davening in their backyard, or whatever the case is. Loitis goidedu. So it's a similar kind of principle of here. Al tifrosh min hatzibur. Don't separate yourself from the community. And there are a number of different explanations and insights that are given as to why this is such a big deal, not to separate yourself from the community. Yes, I know, right now, it's different circumstances, so people don't necessarily separate from the community by choice. However, it's a lesson generally speaking. Even in halacha, I'll give you an interesting example in halacha that people perhaps are not aware of. So the Gemara, the Gemara brings it, but it's brought in halacha as well, that if a person lives in a neighborhood where there is a shul, and they don't go to the shul to daven, so that's called shochein ra. That's considered a bad neighbor. That's tifrosh, somebody who separated themselves from the community. What if you can't go? God forbid somebody's sick in bed and they can't go to shul. So then it says, Al tifrosh min hatzibur, don't separate yourself from the community. Geographically, you have to separate. You have to be home because you're not well, God forbid. So don't separate yourself time-wise. So whatever time the community davens, that's the time that you should daven. So that at the very least, you're indicating, this is where I want to be. Even if I can't be there, this is where I want to be. Al tifrosh min hatzibur is not only a physical thing. Don't physically separate from the community. But it means conceptually, don't ever allow yourself to be in a place where you feel that you've been disconnected from the community. The Rambam writes about this in Hilchos Tshuva. Very interesting place to talk about it, because Hilchos Tshuva is obviously speaking the laws of Teshuvah, how a person is supposed to, it's what we're supposed to be learning at this time of the year, Hilchos Tshuva. How you reconcile with Hashem and so on and so forth. So one of the things the Rambam discusses in Hilchos Tshuva is types of behavior that a person might engage with, which are not technically transgressions, and yet create an environment where a person is unable to do teshuvah. So even though it's not a sin, how can it be? It's not a sin, and yet I don't do teshuvah. So one of the examples that he gives is hapoiresh min hatzibur. If a person separates themselves from the community, so they will find it near impossible to do teshuvah. Why? Why is that near impossible? Obviously, it's never impossible. A person can do teshuvah at any time. However, we are social beings. As the expression goes, Adam Medini, people are social beings. We feed off the energy of other people. So there are certain times where the community is collectively in the teshuvah mentality. That's what's going on. That's the sentiment. That's the emotion. That's the atmosphere. If you're not there at the time that atmosphere is so palpable, then what's going to inspire you to do teshuvah? So as far as the Rambam is concerned, this concept of al tifrosh min hatzibur is pragmatic. It's because when the community moves and shifts and is inspired, you won't move and you won't be inspired. You get left behind. And you might not be able to do teshuvah. It's quite an interesting and practical application. The Gemara in Tainis gives a different perspective. It's perhaps not pragmatic in the classic sense, but it's a little bit more of what we call midah keneged midah. What's one of the things that's difficult about being in a community? Let's be honest. If we call a spade, now that we've had 6 months to be able to reflect on what it is to be part of a community, because we haven't been in the community, I'm pretty sure that there are things that you think about, I really miss being able to do that, interact in this way, and guaranteed there are other things that you really don't miss. Let's be honest. Communities have ups and downs. They have attractive elements and not so attractive elements. And so people say, what do I need it for? What do I need this headache in my life? To go sit there, the davening is slow. This one tries to talk to me while I'm trying to concentrate. Like this, I sit in my garden, it's a machaya, it's a pleasure. Now it's spring, you hear the birds, it's very inspiring, my neshama is alive. What do I need it for? What do I need to go to shul and have to fight with somebody over a fishbowl? Please, I'll order my own fishbowls, I'll sit at home and finish. So the Gemara in Tainis says something interesting. That if a person does not share the tzoros of the community with the community, then they don't have the opportunity to share the simcha, or the expression that he uses in the Gemara there is the Yeshua, the salvation of the community. So al tifrosh min hatzibur means if God forbid a person's not there as part of the community in the tough times, they can't expect that when the good times roll around and everybody's uplifted, that they'll be part of that experience too. And again, that's a pragmatic thing on the one hand, because what do you think? The person who's never there for the community when they're in need, to expect the community is going to come running, it's unlikely. But it's also a little bit more of a spiritual thing. The Yeshua that he's talking about is a little bit bigger than the individual. When the community has some kind of miraculous salvation of sorts, this individual who's separate from the community doesn't get to share in that experience. It's almost like Hashem withholds it from them. So that's Hillel's first lesson. Al tifrosh min hatzibur. Don't separate yourself from the community. There's a story, I can't remember who it was, but one of the great Hasidic masters had a fellow in his shul who, you can imagine, we think we have it hard over here. Oy vey, what am I going to do? I'm going to go to shul, but it's like the weather's a little bit iffy, might rain, I don't know what could happen. So you can imagine in the old days in the shtetl, in the northern hemisphere, in the ice and snow and whatever, sometimes people didn't go to shul for a while. So here was a fellow who hadn't been to shul for weeks because it was cold and it was. So this particular Hasidic master went and paid him a house call. And he walked into his house, it was the middle of winter, and like any good person, he had a fireplace going. And the particular Rebbe walked over to the fireplace, and he took his cane, and he knocked one coal out of the fireplace onto the floor. In those days, the floors were made out of, were pretty much like mud. And then he sat down, and he didn't say a word. And he's sitting, had this awkward silence. You can imagine, there's the guy, and he's got his Rebbe visiting him, and it's very awkward, and it's quiet. So they're both staring, and what do they stare at? They stare at the coal. And sure enough, after a period of time, the coal had cooled down completely. The rest of the fire was raging and hot, and that coal had cooled down. And that's it. The Rebbe then picked himself up, and he said, good night, and he left. But of course, he had made his point very clearly. Because the community, the tzibur is the place, that's the furnace, that's the heat. You know what they say? If you want your house to be a comfortable, whatever it is, 25, 30 degrees, I don't know how hot you want your house to be. Let's say you want your house to be a nice, comfortable 25 degrees. Your fireplace has to be a few hundred degrees. So the community is the hub. The community is the place that's on fire. If a person wants to be warm, when they're not in the community, you've got to obviously be in the fire for long enough. If you separate from the fire for too long, you cool off completely. That's lesson 1 from Hillel. Lesson 2. Ve'al tamin be'atzmoch ad yoim moisach. This is a little bit unnerving to hear this. Don't trust yourself until your last day. What that basically means is, very often a person thinks, you know what? I have mastered this particular area. I'm completely immune. I'll never be tempted by that particular way of thinking or that particular kind of behavior. In fact, I find it repulsive. So he says, Al tamin ba'atzmach ad yom moisach. Don't trust yourself until the last day. And the Mefarshim quote on this, the example of Yochanan Kohen Gadol. It's one of the most incredibly dramatic stories. Yochanan Kohen Gadol was a Kohen Gadol for 80 years. 80 years. Now understand what that means. We're coming up to Yom Kippur, so we're going to fixate on the role of the Kohen Gadol. It's one of the things that's very central to Yom Kippur. What did the Kohen Gadol do on Yom Kippur? He went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. And if a person did not deserve to be in the Holy of Holies, they wouldn't survive it. It simply would not survive. Yochanan Kohen Gadol went in successfully to the Kodesh HaKadoshim for 80 years. Now, most people will tell you that you cannot teach an old dog new tricks. Most people will tell you by the time somebody is 80 years, that's it. I'm good. I'm not going to have those same wild adolescent rebellions that other people might have. And after 80 years, he became a heretic. Imagine this. That's the example that the Gemara uses to illustrate this point. Don't trust yourself till your last day. There is no such person as the person who has completely eradicated the Yetzer Hara. Doesn't work, doesn't happen. The Yetzer Hara is what we call Uman b'melachtoi. He's an exceptional, we say the Yetzer Hara is an exceptional craftsman, exceptionally good at what it does, and will spring up on us unexpected, where you never saw it. I can't believe that this actually happened to me. That's why we have so many laws in Judaism, so many laws that protect us from scenarios that everybody else thinks we're meshuggah about. Why? Because you never, ever, ever know what could happen to a person. Then he says, Va'al tadin es chaverach ad shetekiah limkoimoi. Don't judge your friend until you have been in his place. There's a similar expression from the Native Americans where they say, don't judge somebody until you have walked a mile in his moccasins. To be perfectly honest, if you're a Westerner and you could walk a mile in moccasins, you're pretty impressive, actually. So, what's it telling us over here? Don't judge somebody until you've been in their place. Why doesn't it say, don't judge somebody until you've had their experiences? One of the most important things to always remember is God forbid, if you know somebody is going through a difficult time, and you've been through a difficult time that is similar, so God forbid, the last thing you tell a person is, I know what you're going through. Because we don't. Because no two people are the same, and no two people have the same experiences. So by the same token, don't judge somebody who say, I also had that challenge. I was also tempted in that particular way. I also used to battle with that particular thing. You don't know. You don't know mekoimoi. And the language over here is mekoimoi because mekoimoi means your place. Sometimes your place, your environment, makes it more challenging for you than somebody else in their environment. Here's an example. What happens to us a lot of the time is, unfortunately, we are predisposed to judging other people. It's part of human nature. So what happens to us sometimes is we think, what's with that person? Why do they not control themselves better? Or why don't they participate more? Why don't they learn more? Why don't they come to shul more? Why don't they observe more? Or how come they speak that way? How come they still eat that way? Whatever the thing is. What we forget, and it's incredibly important to know this, what we forget is that our environment might be altogether different from their environment. That's our home environment, what goes on in our own heads, the kind of community that we have, the kind of education that we've had. The Gemara says, "Keshem she'ein partzufeim shono ze mizeh." Just like everybody's face is unique, so everybody's mind and wiring is unique. The Gemara says that. So mekoimoi, the environment that a person is in, may very well be a big influence over how they behave. And so if you really read this line properly, this is how you should read it. Al tadin es chavercha, don't judge another person. Don't judge another. That is the way to begin how we look at people. Before we enter any details, first thing, don't judge. Now you want to judge. So now here's your fail-safe. Ad shetagia limkoimoy. Until you reach that person's place, which is basically saying never. Because you'll never reach their place. Because the only way that you could be in somebody else's circumstances, you would have to be them. Because you don't know what it feels like for them. You don't know their history, even though you may have heard their history. You don't know how their history feels for them. You don't know how their mind works. All you know is how you feel, your history, and how your mind works. And it could well be that you're equipped to succeed in an area where they are not equipped to succeed. So al tadin, the first thought is you don't judge. And if you want to judge, remind yourself, one day when you're that person in their circumstances, that's when you can judge them. In other words, never. Then he says, Ve'al toimar davar she'i efsha lishmoya shesofa lishama. There are two versions of how you're supposed to understand this quotation, which is ironic, because when you understand what the quotation is, it's ironic that there should be two ways to understand it. What does he say? Don't say something she'i efshar lishmoya, that is impossible to hear, shesofa lishama, because eventually it will be heard. One interpretation of that is, don't believe for one moment that if you say something in confidence, it will never get out. Nobody's ever going to hear. I'm just telling you. Nobody's ever going to hear. The nature of these things is, if you don't want anybody to hear it, don't say it. There's even an expression that Chazal use, which is how the Gemara uses it in a different context, but it's relevant here too. There's a concept of shoimeya me'oif haporeach. You hear from a bird that flies past. In other words, it's a funny thing. But once something has been said, and thereby it's been brought into the reality of the world, it's funny how suddenly there's a consciousness and an awareness of it, and things seep out. So the first explanation of this expression is, don't say something trusting that the word won't get out, because the word will get out. Soifoi lihishama. It's going to get out. The other interpretation is directed specifically to a person who's in a position either of authority or a teacher, and this is Al toimar davar shi'i eshelishmoya shesoif elishama. Don't say a statement that people can't work out exactly what you're saying. In other words, don't make an ambiguous statement relying on the fact that eventually people will work out what you meant. That's a dangerous game to play. If you've got something to say it clearly so people know exactly what you're talking about. The Gemara in Pesachim, it's a very interesting piece. The Gemara in Pesachim talks about how a person is supposed to talk. Very interesting, right at the beginning of Pesachim. How is a person supposed to talk? So the Gemara says how you're supposed to talk, Lashon Noki. A person should always speak in the cleanest, most dignified possible way. So if you can say something in a euphemistic way rather than in a crass way, be euphemistic, Lashon Noki, with one exception. If you have to teach. Then the Gemara says if you have to teach, you have to say things as they are, because we're not allowed to be ambiguous when we teach. Hoping that people, you knew what I meant. No, I didn't know what you meant. I need to know, tachlis, how do I behave? This way or that way? Don't beat about the bush. Don't try and be Lashon Noki. When it's time to teach, it has to be clear. Efsheli shmoya, that a person knows straight away exactly what you mean. Lastly, Hillel says, Never say, when I've got a little bit more time, that's when I'll learn. Have you heard that one before? When I've got a little bit more time, that's when I'll learn. It says, you know when that's going to be? You know when it's going to be? Possibly never. It's possible sometimes that a person will never ever find that spare time. Because we're so busy saying, I just got to do this, and I just got to do that, and tomorrow, and after Yom Tov, and when things settle down, and when the coronavirus is over, when the kids are back to school, and yeah, exactly. There's no shortage of reasons to delay what we should do. Okay, so that's the Mishnah pretty much as an overview, as a, so to speak, high-level understanding of the Mishnah. Let's drill down on the first part of the Mishnah because it's a very interesting lesson, and it, as I said, it appears to be a little bit of a contradiction. So let's go back there and explore it in a little bit more detail. Line 1, he tells us, Asei Ritzoinecha Kiritzoinoi. Right? I'm sorry, the other way around. Asei Ritzoinoi Kiritzoinecha. Make Hashem's will your will. That's the first lesson. Make Hashem's will your will. Which sounds like he's saying that what you want in life should be what Hashem wants. The second line he tells us is Batel Ritzoincha Mipnei Ritzoinoi. Nullify, neutralize, dissolve your will in favor of Hashem's will. Okay, so we need to understand that. Whatever we're going to learn over here, one thing we can know by way of introduction is that he says, if you are Batel Ritzoincha, if you nullify your will, then what Hashem is going to do, he's going to nullify the will of others, which basically means, it's quite a powerful thought, if I'm willing to give up what I want and instead to do what Hashem wants, right? Batel Ritzoincha, get rid of your own will. If I'm willing to do that, then what Hashem will do is he'll move aside his will. What's his will? The rules of nature. Hashem designed the rules of nature. That was his will. So he'll push aside the rules of nature to accommodate you because you're going beyond your own interests to do what Hashem wants. Okay, that's by way of introduction. But we still need to understand what's going on over here because it seems to be that there are two different angles and perspectives. So when it comes to serving Hashem, which obviously all of us are meant to do, we have to ask ourselves, what motivates me serving Hashem? Why do I do what Hashem wants? It's a good question, right? Why do I do what Hashem wants? Do I do what Hashem wants because it's the way I was brought up? because I've bought into a particular way of living and now this is just my lifestyle and I don't think twice about it. Because I believe I'm going to be rewarded at some point. If I do what Hashem wants, then good things will happen to me. Because I understand the value of what Hashem wants. The whole lot of reasons why a person might land up doing the things that Hashem wants. Now, we've already seen as a theme in Pirkei Avos that whenever we use this word asay, it's got a specific connotation. For example, we learned asay lecho rav. So we say, what's asay lecho rav? Asay is not just appoint somebody who'll be your rabbi, your mentor, your guide, but asay is a very unique word that implies some level of coercion. Asay lecho rav. Place this person as your guide and authority so that you'll listen to them even when you don't want to listen to them, because you appreciate that they know better. So this word asay retzoncha automatically implies that there's some degree of coercion involved over here. Asay retzono kiretzoncha. Make his will almost superimpose your will. So that's already an inkling. It's a little bit of a sense of where we're going with this. Here we're talking about something that is compelled. Let's understand what that means. So basically what happens is we're taught as human beings that one of our greatest assets is what's called moyach shalit al halev. That your mind should control the heart. You even see it in the design of humans, because the design of all other mammals, pretty much, with minor exceptions, is that they're designed with the heart and the brain almost exactly on the same horizontal axis. Whereas humans are designed to stand vertically, which emphasizes the fact that the head is supposed to control everything beneath it. Control your eyes, control your mouth, control your ears, control your heart. That's how we're supposed to live. So there's supposed to be a balabos, as we learned last week, right? There's supposed to be a power and authority in my own life. What's the power and authority? My mind. Asay retzoino kiretzoincha means I have to use my mind to help me to understand and to appreciate why what Hashem wants is more valuable and more beneficial than what I want. Because, it's quite normal for a person to say, I'm going to get what I want, I'm going to chase what I want, I'm going to pursue what I want. So I have to get my mind right. Asay retzoino. I have to get my mind to help to explain and to convince my self, my conscious self, my feelings, and so on and so forth, that what Hashem wants is better. This is a process that is called, in the language of Hasidus, we call this process iskafia. I don't know if you've heard the word before. So iskafia, which if you look at it, it's an Aramaic word, but the root of the word is kfiyah, which means coercion. The way we serve Hashem is we coerce our Yetzer Hara to listen. We coerce our emotions to fall in line. So let's talk practically. Practically for a minute. Let's say, present company excluded. Of course, this never happens to you. Let's say, hypothetically, there's somebody somewhere in the world, probably, deep in Scandinavia somewhere, who has an urge to speak Lashon Hara. Don't know if you've ever heard of such a thing. The person has an urge to speak Lashon Hara. So urge, do you hear the word? Urge. It's an impulsive thing. Nobody sits down and says, this afternoon I'm going to gather some friends together and boy, are we going to speak Lashon Hara. That's not how it works. It's impulsive. You're in the middle of a conversation, you've heard a piece of news, or in the middle of the conversation they're speaking about an individual and that stimulates something. So you have the urge to speak Lashon Hara. Urge and impulse. That's not how that's not the greatness of a human. Animals also have urges and impulses. The greatness of a human being is that I can control the urge and the impulse. So that's called iskafia, meaning the brain in me, the higher self, is intended to and has the responsibility to be koife, to compel the lower self to behave. So for argument's sake, if you, for example, would take your dog for a walk, right? So you take your dog for a walk, your responsibility as the owner is to make sure that the dog doesn't run in front of a car, and that the dog doesn't go rip up somebody's garden, and that the dog doesn't attack some child who's walking down the street, etc. That's your responsibility. So the dog has its impulses. The dog wants to run. The dog wants to jump on the kid and lick the kid and make whatever. My responsibility is I have to control kfiyah. I have to suppress that urge. I have to control, I have to rein it in. That's my responsibility. So asay retzoino kirtzoincha means that there's this ongoing effort that I'm supposed to employ all the time to apply and, so to speak, force Hashem's ratzon over my ratzon. My ratzon is impulsive. This is what I want to do today. It's a beautiful spring day. I want to go sit outside in the sun and read my novel. That's what I want to do. So my head has to tell me, go ahead and do that. But first, daven something in the morning. Read some Tehillim. That's basically what I have to do. I have to direct myself. I say, Ratzoinoi kirtzoincha, to the point that eventually what Hashem wants actually becomes my ratzon, which means what Hashem wants is usually not what we can see. We have to learn it. We don't see it. You don't walk down the street and as a scenario unfolds in front of you, you have this clarity. Oh, this is what Hashem wants. We don't have that clarity. We have to learn it. So asay retzoinoi kirtzoincha means that what we want to get is we want to get to a point where Hashem's will becomes clear enough to us that it's actually what I want. Retzoinoi kirtzoincha, Hashem's will becomes mine. Generally speaking, this approach, this compelling our Yetzer Hara to toe the line, this overwhelming our urges and impulses to rather follow what Hashem wants, this is called Sheishes Yemei HaMaaseh. Can you hear the word? Ma'aseh. Ma'aseh is the same word as asay. The 6 days of coercion. Everybody always translates it just as the 6 days of the week, the 6 days of work. Because from Sunday until Friday, you're supposed to, or you're allowed to work. But Maaseh means the 6 days of trying to coerce my impulsive side to align with what Hashem wants. It's one degree, it's one experience of how I commit to Hashem. It's one type of approach, it's one channel of personal growth. The weekday channel. Asay retzoincha. And the basic net result of all of that will be, I still have a ratzon. There is what I want, but I'm mature enough to relinquish what I want because I appreciate that what Hashem wants is more valuable. That's the first line that he teaches us. Asay retzoinoi kirtzoincha. You keep working at yourself and working at yourself and working at yourself until eventually Hashem's ratzon is ke. Ke is a very important prefix. Ke means similar to, as if it were what you want. It's not really what you want. What you really want is you want to go out and have a strawberry daiquiri. I don't know what you want to do. You want to go out and have a good time, But Kiritza, you work on yourself and you work on yourself and you work on yourself until eventually you are so committed that you'll even relinquish your coffee chiller in favor of what Hashem wants. It's like a big thing. It's what we call Mesiras Nefesh, right? In the most extreme form, I can control myself to such an extent I can give up even the things that I love for what Hashem wants. If a person works on that over a period of time, eventually you can get to graduate to an even higher level of connection to Hashem. The higher level of connection to Hashem is called Batel Retzoincha Mipnei Retzoinoi, where you are able to completely remove your own ratzon. So the first level is, I have a ratzon. I have things that I want. I have my impulses. But I'm compliant. I'm disciplined. I appreciate the value of what Hashem wants, so I allow that to override what I want. But the ultimate state, which incidentally is not so easily accessible and mostly restricted to tzaddikim, not saying it's impossible for us, but it's mostly in the realm of tzaddikim, is batel retzoincha mipnei retzoinoi, where a person reaches a point, I no longer have an independent ratzon. I no longer have the struggle. The first level, I'm struggling consistently because I want this, and I say, no, iskafia. We're going to rein the urge in, and we're going to direct things. But the higher experience, which is an incredible experience for somebody to have, is batel retzoincha mipnei retzoinoi, where you completely relinquish your own sense of self and you're merely just there to facilitate what Hashem wants. That is called ishapcha. Ishapcha comes from the word hefech, where you turn something to become its opposite. That means to say that my urge and impulse that used to run away from Hashem and had to constantly be pulled in is now batel. It loses its own interest, and instead that same energy and that same passion is now directed in the opposite direction towards Hashem. Now that's an incredible thing to achieve. What does that mean practically? So practically at this time of the year, we know we're talking about Teshuvah. It's the Teshuvah season. Hopefully by this stage, some people have beaten the rush and you've already done Teshuvah, so you're good. You're ready for Rosh Hashanah. But Teshuvah season, there are basically two levels of Teshuvah. The one kind of Teshuvah is where you try everything in your power to regret and eradicate the past. Get rid of it. Iskafya. Totally subdue it, shaft it into a corner, and make sure that it never expresses itself again. It's got to go. Asay ritzoinoi. Asay from the strong arm language. Strong arm your impulses and your history out of the picture. And that's generally speaking the Teshuvah of the month of Elul. And then as we come into Rosh Hashanah and specifically to Yom Kippur, then you're supposed to have a higher level of Teshuvah. That's the Teshuvah of love. The Teshuvah that says, I'm motivated to connect. In fact, I'm doubly motivated to connect because of how much time I've lost. Because of the things that distracted me and the places I went and the choices I made that were so unhealthy. So that's why I feel extra urgency to want to connect to Hashem. And that's why now I'm not thinking about the things that I used to want and I had to fight with. Now the only thing I want is, as we say in L'David Hashem Ori, Lach azois benoyam Hashem levaker beicholoi, shifti beveis Hashem. That's it. Acha shalti. I have only one thing I want. Only one thing. I just want to be with you, Hashem. I just want to be as close as possible. So that's effectively what he's telling us over here in this Mishnah, that there are two phases to our spiritual development. The first phase is where you fight and fight and fight and fight the impulses. And the second stage is where you reach a point where those impulses have actually been flipped, and what used to drive me away from Hashem now drives me towards Hashem. And that would be an incredible place for a person to be not only meaningful, but it would be a very solid ground for somebody to stand on. And like I say, it's generally the realm of tzaddikim. However, through the process of teshuvah, it's accessible to us. Through the not just ordinary teshuvah, but the kind of teshuvah that says, I'm rushing towards Hashem. All I want is Hashem. More Hashem and more Hashem. As the Gemara says, if a person has sinned, what should they do? If you used to learn 1 page, learn 2 pages. In other words, add and double up the efforts. And that's something which certainly is accessible to all of us. So that's where we shall pause for today.